Hey, so how's it, everyone? Welcome to another episode of FANatics. I'm Alex, your host, and with me, my awesome colleagues, Sholin and Tiejo. And today we are tackling some very interesting stories, something that's a little bit close to home. We're going to be tackling the use of the internet and regulation that has just been introduced, as well as reflecting on Human Rights Day, and then we'll see what we can squeeze in after that. So, without further ado, gents, the we have the story from Business Tech, and it says that South Africa has introduced a new internet censorship laws. Now, what they're referring to here is the Film and Publication Amendment Act, which came into effect at the beginning of this month. So it's in effect, and essentially, just to give some background before we tackle it, is that the government has said that the act is set to transform the Film and Publication Board, which is currently has previously been in existence, to regulate content. When you have like 18 VSN, those kind of things, that's what they do. And they're expanding its mandate and migrating it from a simple classification of authority to a fully fledged regulator with the legitimate powers to issue and renew licensed certificates, accredited distributors, and impose fines in case of non-compliance. So essentially what they're doing is to try and adjust to the fourth industrial revolution, and sort of try and regulate content distributed online. Now, I'll just go through some of the key changes that have been introduced through the legislation. So the Act gives the Publications Board the power to regulate almost all online content published in South Africa. Let's just take a moment to think how much content is published online. All online distributors will be required to register with the Publication Board for classification. And then there's some other stuff. It's intended to limit the ability for the distribution of pornography and revenge porn. When people, maybe send some private niceties to their partners, and then later on they break up and they're not so nice with each other, and they share that content. So they're trying to do that. There's also a hate speech clause in which any medium which amounts to propaganda for war, incites imminent violence, advocates for hate speech shall be guilty of an offense. Now, I think we can all agree that, wanting to tackle something like child pornography and making sure people are, safe is an admirable thing. But gents, I think here, as the article's sort of headlines, is it tantamount to censorship? And we've got issues of regulation at play here. So I mean, obviously we've had a recent exposure to regulation through something like lockdowns, which is maybe a severe version of it. But Tiejo, let me come to you. I mean, the idea of the government controlling what is published, where do you think its limits lie? Just kind of broadly in your personal life, how do you feel about this kind of legislation?
Well, I don't think I can speak to the legislation in and of itself. I honestly have not had the time to read through it. But if the whole idea behind the legislation is to censor people from saying certain things because government does not agree with the views, then that would be quite unfortunate and quite problematic, something that we should not allow to happen as citizens of the country. But in the instance that government wants to regulate things that are said, things that are harmful in particular, then I don't see where the problem would lie there. It would take reading the legislation and understanding it thoroughly to make a useful comment around this. Sure.
No, for sure. But I mean, Sheldon, if we think about the kind of content that you can find online, I mean, it's bottomless, really. I think there's definitely a case to be made for wanting to ensure that people are not exposed to harm. But in a way, does not take away a bit of the agency of the individual to decide what is and what isn't harmful, and maybe finding avenues to at least complain about it or lay some sort of, yeah, exactly, just sort of express how they feel about it, and maybe have avenues there to deal with it.
Yeah, I agree with you, Alex, for sure. Because listen, when it comes to things like regulation and the government, it's always a red flag, especially when it comes to the regulation of speech. Because I mean, yeah, at FAN, we believe that free speech also includes speech that we do not agree with, and speech that people might find controversial. And sitting on the sidelines, as you say, and letting the government monitor what you see on social media, what you can or you can't say, that's setting a rather dangerous precedent. Because I mean, I am a great supporter of digital social media platforms, mainly because it allows us to express ourselves freely, and that's what we here at FAN do essentially. But when it comes to the censorship, it is rather a threat to our ability to express ourselves and to debate freely. Because what if I share my favorite meme or offside joke about the ANC or the government? Will they then just ban it and stop me from using the internet? Because then everything we say will be problematic. And how far will it extend? Will it only be on public platforms, or will they eventually have the power to regulate our WhatsApp groups, what messages are seen privately? Like that's a slippery slope we may go down. And then an important question I also have is, they have this big grand plans to essentially regulate our social media activity, but do they actually have the capacity to regulate this all of the social media content happening in South Africa? Because I mean, my guy, they're talking about the fourth industrial revolution. They can't even give us electricity, bro. I'm like, what? They
Or at
can't
least
even run a home office properly.
Or at
Like,
least if there's no electricity, then you can't charge your phone, so you can't watch your social media or put out your propaganda. So
exactly.
problem
Then
solved.
I'm missing out on all of my TikToks. Then yes. So they actually there are more important things to focus on than trying to regulate people's speech on social media. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, Tiako, the one thing that struck me, and Shirley and I deal a lot with this, obviously, in using social media as a platform to put forward fans ideas and to reach out to audiences. And we often get issues with community guidelines on the platforms themselves. So we see that there are mechanisms within the infrastructure that allow for people to complain, allow for people to flag content. Is this just a way for the government to look like they're doing something? If let's think about something like the SABC, it's not in a great shape financially, or from a sort of, well, I guess financially in its ability to see through its mandate. Is it just kind of trying to pick small battles without any real without any real advantages, in the sense that we speak about, Sheldon wants to watch his TikToks, and the internet is also a great space for people to express themselves, for these avenues to generate income through content production. Is this misguided, or is it just does it mean well, or is it a bit far-fetched?
Sure. Well, I think it takes me back to the first point. It would really, really take me reading the amendment to the act, understanding exactly what's being proposed. And yeah, that's only when I can arrive at such a conclusion. But I think an important thing to note from my understanding of the whole act, uh, the act does not seek to regulate everyone and anyone who's on social media. I think it's particularly made for commercial distributors, from what I've read and understood, right? So as to whether it's a necessary amendment or not, it would really take me reading the amendments. Then we can have a conversation as to whether I think the amendments are necessary or not. Sure.
Yeah. I also want to say something on that. Diego raised an important point there about the fact that it's aimed primarily at the commercial distributors on social media, because those are essentially people that use social media to do their business. Because there's things like Facebook Marketplace, Instagram has like essentially Instagram shops. These people who advertise their businesses on Facebook and Instagram and all of these platforms. And I think we shouldn't also be making it more difficult for people to be doing the business, especially if it comes out of an entrepreneurial spirit of them trying to sell things that they make at home. They don't need added regulation of, oh no, I first need to go check with the government. Can I sell this on IG? Like, they don't need that anymore, because things are really difficult to do business in South Africa anyway. So yeah, that's my thought on that one as well.
No, it's quite an interesting case study, because I think there's definitely an argument to be made for regulation. Obviously at FAN, we don't believe that, the government shouldn't exist and everyone should be able to do whatever they think. So I think it's just an important thing to keep track of. And hopefully here at FAN, we can sort of break it down as it materializes. Because, if we spend all our days kind of following politics and advocating for freedom, if we can't make sense of these things, then there's obviously a bit of an issue, or we just need to introspect a little bit. But guys, let's move along. We're recording this episode after a long weekend, and that is because we had Human Rights Day yesterday, which is an unusual name for a day that actually commemorates quite a significant event in South Africa's history, and that is the Sharpeville massacre of 1960. Now, I'm just going to play this clip, and then we'll jump into discussing the day and reflecting on it.
It's March 21st, 1960. Police opened fire on 20,000 protesters, killing 69 and injuring over 200. They were unarmed. The crowd was protesting against the pass system that regulated and limited travel and employment for black South Africans in their own country. The crowd also rallied against low wages, high rents and poor living conditions in the townships. The massacre was seen as one of the key events in the fall of apartheid. Today, though, and things seem different. The township of Sharpeville is set to get an $8 million facelift from state funds. And when the World Cup comes to town, locals will get to see footballers from the Ivory Coast and Switzerland training at facilities in the township and its surrounding areas. But the ghosts of 1960 seem to reappear earlier this year when Sharpeville residents torched cars and clashed with the police, citing poor living conditions and the government's inability to provide the most basic services. Half a century on from the event that was so instrumental in shaping its history, tough questions remain for the Rainbow Nation. But this time, at its root cause is poverty, not racism.
All right, so let's leave it there. So I think, obviously, I think there's some very interesting points raised. I think it's important to acknowledge the day that was commemorated yesterday for what it represents. Obviously, pass laws was a massive restriction on the freedom of movement for Black South Africans during apartheid, and that was systematic racism. We chatted a bit about it last week. That was systematic racism at its finest. That is the clincher. That is exactly what it was. Tioko, let's start with you. Your reflections on Human Rights Day, just to start off with, and maybe its importance in how people think about South Africa in 2022.
Sure. Well, human rights, I think let's begin with human rights, right? And human rights are rights that are fundamental to our lives as human beings. And these rights attempt to create a decent environment for us to exist in and to try by all means necessary to protect us from being discriminated against in any means and in any way, right? And Freedom Day in South Africa is very much linked to the 1st of March 1960, as we have seen. events that took place in Sharpeville when numbers of protesters were murdered for protesting against the past law mainly. And so it's for me personally, it's disappointing that the day has sort of just lost its meaning. We have gotten to a point whereby young people don't even know what the 21st of March every year that we celebrate as Human Rights Day represents. But I think it's a deliberate thing on the part of the government, of course, to do away with the whole meaning behind the day and just turn it into a partying day in a way, so young people can move away from politics and not strongly engage them around what they stood for in 1960 and what they currently stand for as an organization. I mean, the African National Congress in 1960 was out and about fighting for people's freedoms, and yet here we are today. They are the very people who are violating our freedoms. So I personally think that there is this deliberate thing to keep young people uninformed and away from this politics, so we don't question them today as the government of the day. So it's disappointing, really.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Shalin, I guess in a way, giving people the day off to party and enjoy is kind of the ultimate expression of freedom, for which people fought for, and unfortunately many people died to attain the ability to move and live freely. What are your thoughts around the not so much the day itself, but rather in 2022, obviously it's a far cry from past laws, what we experience today. We do live in a democracy, in a free society, but what are some of the challenges that you think are facing young people in hamstringing their ability to earn a decent living, to get a good education, one of those good things?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think human rights, it is rooted in, for South Africans especially, is rooted in the Sharpeville massacre, and the fact that so many people actually literally died in protest against things like the past laws, which gave the government the ability to control how people move and when they move there, and under which circumstances they are allowed to move. And I mean, in our constitution, we have the Bill of Rights, and which essentially enshrines our freedom of movement, our freedom of expression, our freedom of religion, the ability to get a basic education and the right to have political rights essentially, and to exercise those rights. And I mean, that's why that should be a cause of celebration, that we are able to actually achieve these things are in our constitution. But what's more important is the ability for us to actually exercise those rights in reality. Because if we just look over the past 2 years where we essentially had lockdowns, and government was once again given the right for us were given the right essentially to again control the way we trade. They told us when on what we were allowed to buy, what we were not allowed to buy, what companies or businesses were allowed to sell during lockdown. They told us during which periods of time we can operate, aka curfew, when we are allowed outside of our house and when we are not. They were allowed to have this sort of power, and that's why I feel like it's important reminder for us to actually, we are actually the ones who have power, in the individuals, the ordinary South Africans. We have the right to actually, while the government's trying to regulate every aspect of our movement and our trade, we are actually the ones who are supposed to regulate the power of the state, of government, because as you say, we are believers that the state and government has an essential role to play in society. However, it is a limited role that it needs to play. And that's why I feel like this past Human Rights Day should have served as an important reminder for the rights that was fought for, and that was literally died for. And as the Diego mentions, that it's a sad reality to know that so many youth are not aware of the true meaning of Human Rights Day, that is not just another holiday to lounge on the couch and play PS4.
For sure. No, the general gist I'm getting from you guys is that, and I think to link the two topics together, is that it's important to value freedom, and I think it's also important to always be on guard. You know, something like, we don't fully understand the Film and Publications Board Act just yet. The amendment bill, but you know, it's important to be alert to what's going on to protect those hard fought for freedoms. Now, just very briefly, Tejo, we just in a couple of minutes, moving along to just our third topic, is you have been very active in following the Ehailing protests that have been going on. You've spoken with some of the organizers informally. We touched on it a few weeks ago. What is important about this protest that you think our listeners should be aware of?
Sure. Well, I think the most important thing about this protest is a concern around the safety of e-hailing service drivers, right? So there's an issue in areas like Joburg, Pretoria, Durban, and apparently in Polokwane as well. I wasn't aware until last week, whereby meter taxi and minibus taxi drivers pose a danger to e-hailing taxi drivers, right? The argument that your meter taxi drivers and minibus drivers make is that e-hailing drivers are here in the transport environment now to take away their jobs, to take away their income, because it's more convenient for a customer to call an e-hailing taxi driver as opposed to a minibus or a meter taxi driver. So for me, the most important issue that the drivers are tackling in the 3 days struggle is in the 3 days protest, is the issue around safety, their safety, that government should intervene, and no one should be allowed to stop another man or woman from making an income simply because they cannot compete with them at the level that the other person is delivering services at. But of course, we have seen that the e-hailing taxi drivers have raised many issues. Actually, they've raised issues around salaries, for example, salaries that they make and stuff. But obviously, those are concerns between a driver and the particular company that has hired them. They are really, of course, of concern to FAN, but not something that we would as an organization stand up and want to intervene in. Yeah. But the issue of safety and businesses not being able to operate safely in some environments because there are certain citizens who are posing a threat to them, that's an issue that we are most concerned about and most interested in as far as those strikes and protests are concerned. Sure.
For sure. Yeah, it's essentially people's freedom of movement, freedom to trade, and freedom
to earn. Sure.
Freedom to earn, 100%. Yeah. So, yeah, guys, thank you so much. I think on that note, let us jump into this week's episode of Burning Questions. Alrighty, guys, welcome to this week's edition of Burning Questions. I'm standing in for Mbali today, who is currently on leave. So, guys, this week's quote card is one featuring former Proteas cricketer Makhaya Ntini, and it reads, "Nobody would be happy if they thought they were picked because of their color." Now, off the bat, that seems like a pretty logical thing to portray. Sholin, you put together this quote card. What are your thoughts about it?
Yeah, man, I couldn't agree with him more. I'm not really sure. I'm certain that he was actually a brilliant cricketer, but he's also a brilliant free thinker, in my opinion. Because I absolutely agree with him. I don't want to be chosen or picked or placed above somebody else just because my skin color might be a bit darker than the next person's or might be a bit lighter than the next person. I want to actually be chosen because of my abilities, the discipline I portray, and what I'm actually able to bring to the table when it comes to a work or a project or whatever the case may be. Those are the reasons why I want to be chosen. Essentially, I want to be chosen based on merit and not skin color. And the fact that that's a controversial thought in this day and age blows my mind. Because I mean, at FAN we all believe in non-racialism, which is essentially that people's character matter more than the color of their skin.
Absolutely. I think Tioko, we just reflected in Freedom FANatics about on systematic racism perpetrated through something like the pass laws, for which the protesters in Sharpeville in the 1960s stood up against. Now, I think obviously Makayantini here is referring to quotas in cricket, in sport. Now, what are your feelings about quotas? Because I think a lot of people might say we are redressing the past injustices, such as a racist law that past laws was. Now, is it such a bad thing then that now we're fighting fire with fire? We've got to tip the scales in the other direction.
Well, I think coaches are terrible. Coaches are completely terrible. That's something I must mention from the start. My whole thinking around coaches is that we should definitely empower people who were previously disadvantaged by the apartheid system, by the so-called system of whiteness and stuff. But you don't empower people with a job. You don't empower someone who has never played football before by taking them into a stadium when there's an important game playing and expect them to play well. You empower people by offering them the skills and knowledge to do something, right? So if ever we want to empower someone who's interested in getting into the sporting field, for example, and they don't have the right resources and stuff, you don't take this person and make them part of the national team. You provide them with the support to and help them become those players that could then contest with everyone else to be in the national team. Education wise, you don't empower someone with a job directly. You empower them with an education, then they compete for a job. That's how it's done. You empower people with knowledge and skills, not that end thing, not by putting them in a sport team or giving them a job. It's nonsensical. But regarding the code in itself, personally, in responding to it, I would not want to speak for everyone. I think I could only speak for myself, that I personally would not appreciate knowing that I have been accepted into the national team of cricket in South Africa on the basis that I am black and nothing else outside that. But of course, there are people who would definitely appreciate that, would celebrate that. And these are people who, for the most part, we see fighting against people like ourselves who are against BE laws and other racial laws. There are many people who are fighting those things and who are benefiting from the laws as they currently stand. And they don't want to see the laws dismantled because they are benefiting from them. So I personally would not be proud of such a situation, but I do think there are people out there who are already proud of being given things simply on the basis of their race or gender.
And I think if we look at this table from research at the Institute of Race Relations Studies, that's not the most up to date stats, but their 2018 field survey showed that the majority of people agree with Makayantini's sentiment, and I think that it just goes to show that 83% of people think that sports teams should be selected on merit and not quotas. Yet the quota system still persists. But one interesting dynamic that this raises, and we've got a comment here from one of our Facebook followers, and his comment is that, and his comments generally, we see your comments, guys. Don't worry, are generally a bit, let's say they are opposed. They're often opposed to what we think and we suggest. And this comment says that people wouldn't want to be selected on their skin color, so insinuating that players are picked for their color is where it hurts. Now, correct me if I'm wrong here, but in a way, Sholin, that is the whole issue with the system, is that it creates this feeling that people are selected because of their race when you remove merit as the overarching factor.
Yeah. No, exactly. I agree with you. And I love that survey from the IRR. And what I love about it is that across the board, regardless of race classification, in this case, it doesn't matter whether the person is black, white, Indian, or colored. The majority of people agree that merit should be the primary factor when it comes to the selection of sports teams and not quotas. Because even if in the fact that if I have to undergo life-saving surgery or something, I will not be looking at the surgeon's skin color, but I will be looking at his ability to actually save my life by performing the surgery that's actually required, to improve my health. That's the thing I would be focused on. Whether he has a track record of successful surgeries, not because he was previously disadvantaged. And that's why I think it's so important that we actually start instilling that thing again, that, you know what, you are given an opportunity based on the merit that you have showcased, and not because you are not merely because you have more melanin in your skin tone than the next person.
Yeah, and I think what's important, I guess a second takeaway from me for the day is to base your judgment of success of a policy or program on its outcomes and not its intentions. Any last thoughts from your side, Tiago, before we wrap up?
Well, my last thoughts relate to the comment that you shared. I think it came from Facebook, right? I think if that's the conclusion that the author arrives at, we might as well just do away with quotas. Then let's take them out. Yeah, let's take them out if they are just sitting there and doing nothing. But they are there to do something, and what they are doing is that they are discriminating against persons who are not black, and yeah, they should go away for that reason.
For sure. Guys, that's all the time we have for today. As always, you can catch all of our content on our social media platforms at Badger of Liberty. Find us on Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, as well as Instagram and Twitter. Guys, thank you so much for joining me and my awesome colleagues, Sholin and Tiago. And remember that your freedom is worth fighting for.